We're going to shift gears here a little bit and talk about downtown revitalization. Okay. Everyone's favorite and most exciting topic to talk about. Penn Yan's the winner. It took longer this year, it seemed like, to find a winner in the Finger Lakes.
Yeah.
Usually these announcements, when was Geneva's announcement made? That's what I was going to ask you.
I thought Geneva's announcement was made in August or July.
Okay. So, I thought, because I remember it being very warm when the governor came to
they're usually summertime announcements, you know, because summertime in the Finger Lakes is when the governor wants to come to town and dole out his checks.
So Penn Yan defeated Seneca Falls and Newark, and I'm assuming others who were finalists here in the Finger Lakes region for the $10 million prize. Geneva and Watkins Glen were the previous winners. It's the program's third year existing and running, and a number of projects are now going to be funded in Penn Yan, focusing around water and connectivity between the village and the water, and that seems to be the MO of this whole project, as it happens every year, because it seems to be a new project every single year. Where does it stand now, though? We talked about it a few weeks ago on the program, because it feels like we're almost getting to here's the list of the candidates that we've been talking about and cycling through.
Right.
They're finalists, then they win.
Yeah, Penn Yan was not on my radar screen, right? So I initially said, oh yeah, Seneca Falls makes good sense, and then we had our program, and I was like, whoa, you're totally right, Newark. Like, yes, Newark deserves it. But we didn't even I don't even think we discussed Penn Yan. So
here's my theory, and I'll make this quick. My theory on that is because Penn Yan doesn't have a town-specific or village-specific economic development wing. The county handles that for them, so they never push out a press release when they become a finalist, or when they're notified that they become a finalist. So I think just by merit of not having the PR drive to let people know, because they were finalists last year, and they may have been a finalist the year before that as well. I'm not sure, but this does to sort of piggyback off of that for those who might be wondering. Seneca Falls does have an economic development wing. Geneva, I'm assuming, does have that means. So I think that's how we got here, where Penn Yan popped up out of nowhere.
Right. And I think, like Canandaigua was a finalist when Geneva was a finalist, I think. So it makes sense to think that they were in the mix, although I don't know if I remember reading that or not. But I'm assuming. I just assume if you were a finalist, you'd probably apply the next year. But, I mean, it makes sense to me that a place like Canandaigua wouldn't get it. In fact, I don't think they should ever get it, because I don't think they meet the criteria. But I am starting to feel like what the governor tried to do. Now, I don't know. I don't know if this was his strategy, because this is really, if this was his strategy, this was incredibly clever. I don't know if he was playing this long game, but it seems to me like what the DRI has done is two things. It has acknowledged that upstate communities have been disinvested from by the state for years and years and years, and it has depressed our quality of life. So the first thing it did was kind of raise awareness that, oh, these cities need more funding to thrive. First thing. But the second thing is, and this is what I think is kind of a long-term thing that I hope was his plan, was to say, but throwing money at any community, not just upstate, but particularly upstate, throwing money at a problem is never a good strategy, because money alone is not going to solve the issue. What you need is a plan. So let's reward the people who've done good planning. So at this point, I feel like they could end the DRI process altogether and just say, communities that do good, community-minded planning, that can show broad support for a variety of efforts that don't leave anybody behind, will continue to receive enhanced funding from the state. And then put all these communities back in the mix. I mean, Newark deserves some money. Seneca Falls deserves some money. Okay. Not right now. because Seneca Falls clearly cannot plan right now. So Seneca Falls doesn't deserve any more money. But Geneva has this incredible comprehensive plan that has been being put into practice, right? They are managing their first DRI. Those projects are being put into practice. And where some of those projects maybe shouldn't be put into practice, because personally, I don't think we need a marina, the community still is being engaged. So we've learned our lesson, right? Upstate communities needed to get our acts together and have plans that people have buy-in for. But now, like, just give us the money, right? Like, I feel like Cuomo should just say, okay, from now on, the communities that have figured it out get more. So that is I don't know if that was his long-term strategy, to show people the right way to do it and then to reward them, or if it just worked out that way.
I think it's just working out that way. And I'm not really sure if this, because there have been a lot of questions about sort of the community process that's happened in various communities, because it isn't structured by the state. It's structured by the individual community.
Right.
They have to come up with the plan themselves. I think there are a lot of questions as far as, what this is really doing. There are only so many communities that are eligible. And I think, if you look at the names of the communities, you can pretty quickly identify the ones in the Finger Lakes that are truly capable of producing this type of plan that could be, rewarded by getting a $10 million prize.
Right.
Seneca Falls is, of course, one of them. But essentially, you're saying the 2 or 3 largest individual townships or cityships or communities in each county in the Finger Lakes, and it excludes everyone else.
Well, okay, but I kind of think that's warranted, because one of the main problems that New York State has are these multiple layers of bureaucracy and suburban versus urban communities. And really, for efficiency's sake, we should be centralizing our resources and our investment in city centers, because cities are what are carrying the amenities that people are looking for, even in terms of like services, colleges, whether private, public, community colleges, hospitals, social service offices, government buildings, schools, educational facilities. So I don't really have a problem with those population centers that provide those services, all tax exempt, getting a boost from the state to say, if you can find a way to maintain those services and maintain a quality of life that keeps those vibrant, because, if Geneva or Penn Yan or Waterloo, if those communities tank, maybe those hospitals go away. If those communities tank, maybe we see a lack of expansion amongst colleges or community college programs. So I don't know. I tend to think that the population centers deserve the extra money.
I think I 50% agree. I agree that they deserve money. I don't think that they should be looped into the same program that, in theory, every community is supposed to be eligible for. In theory.
Okay. All right, that makes
sense.
So
I would break with you in terms of saying, yes, absolutely, find that funding for the communities that are going to work together, especially the ones who are carrying a larger portion of the burden.
Right.
But there also has to be a way to figure out how the Lodis, the Coverts, the really small, the Burdettes, the Bloomfields, how those communities can continue to operate, because you're seeing what these really rural municipalities are being faced with, and we're going to talk about Seneca Falls as being an example of this. It's becoming too expensive to even operate. So you can talk about, dissolving villages, you can talk about, streamlining services and, merging services, shared services with like the county or different townships, but there comes a point where you just can't anymore.
Well, we're a long way from that point. I do think government consolidation is still viable for a lot of, and just to look at Seneca County, look at how huge the county is. just kind of geographically some of the diversity there. The idea that, okay, this is an area where I think Molinaro really speaks to people, and now I've seen his signs all over the place, so clearly he's getting the message that he's going to have some upstate residents here. But a county government that is empowered to manage the rural areas is going to be far more efficient and effective than all of these individual municipalities trying to maintain their own systems independently. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't have their own systems, because certainly, and we see in cases of like emergency management, you need the on the ground, in the community systems to work. But I think county government, which is also supported by the state, I think that is the purview of supporting and getting funds to these smaller communities. But this is a very nuanced discussion that we're trying to have in a short period of time. So I don't mean to say that what I'm offering is exactly the right answer, but
yeah, and I think some of the
ideas.
One of the challenges with, yes, I think there are ways you could continue to, work towards more merging of various services. But what you find in places you mentioned Seneca County as being an example, what you're finding already is that folks in the southern end of the county are going to Tompkins County for various things rather than actually staying with the county that is supposed to be,
right.
That they're paying taxes to.
Right.
So I don't think I think there's a limit, especially when you talk about how geographically expansive and diverse these communities are. The east-west divide in Ontario County is another sort of that same sort of discussion and debate.
Yep.
And I guess what I really am trying to get to as far as the DRI, in relation to the DRI, is just that there does have to be a better process that includes everyone, or maybe a separate program entirely on the economic development front that just allows for more communities to be involved. Because it does sort of seem now like we're rinsing and repeating. And I think, we talked about it last time we were here, I wouldn't be surprised to see Geneva be considered for a second round of funding.
I think we ought to be.
Before other before other communities get their share, or what would be perceived as their share. Right. So obviously we talked a little bit about Seneca Falls right there, but now the latest.
Oh man! Okay.
The latest in Seneca Falls. Yeah. So memorandum of understanding showed up in local media the weekend before this past town board meeting. It outlined a $100 million deal, a new host agreement between the town of Seneca Falls and Seneca Meadows, which would keep the landfill operating through 2037. It guaranteed $5 million annually to the town, which Supervisor Greg Lazaro said should be embraced to ensure the town's financial viability and stability. The resolution introducing that memorandum was pulled about 5 minutes after the meeting started. So it disappeared, and it was done so at the town's attorney's advice, according to the supervisor. Then that following weekend, this past weekend, a story surfaced in the Finger Lakes Times outlining extensive budget cuts to police, cuts to virtually everything, the assessor's office, everything you could possibly imagine, the town clerk's office. And I think a lot of people have been reading this as this is a scare tactic to make people, say yes to a new host agreement. Right. Maybe, but I have a slightly different view on it. But I'm very curious what you think as, once again, the objective outsider in this situation. What is your feeling on this situation as it continues to unfold?
Well, I don't want you to fall into a false dilemma here, because it could be the case that budget cuts are needed and it's a scare tactic, okay? Because let me tell you that there is, I feel like I've seen this before. I think there might be a city attorney playbook that says when you're dealing with a big sum of money and a big deal that you want to make, The best way to get any people on the fence off of the fence is to put forward the scariest alternative so that they will hear from their constituents, well, we don't like the landfill, but you probably better keep doing it because we don't like all this other stuff more. So I would say, yes, it's a scare tactic, but that doesn't mean that on the face of it, though some of those things aren't still needed from a financial perspective. But just to back up a second, if an elected official comes to anyone and says, if we don't get a $5 million bailout from the trash industry, we can't function, someone ought to say, then you should resign because clearly you've gotten us into a situation that is completely unsustainable. Because if we need to win the lottery to function, something has gone wrong structurally for a long time to get us to that place. But that doesn't seem to be what's being said. I mean, people are very upset at what appears to be, Let's make clear, I am not using the legal term of this because when attorneys are involved, I can imagine someone trying to say that I'm accusing people of nefarious things. When it looks like a bribe, when it looks like here's money for something you don't want because we know money will make it into something you can swallow, then that seems to me like you've gotten your community into a pretty bad situation. So I just think the whole thing's crazy. I think all this situation has done is to expose that the town of Seneca Falls must be horribly mismanaged financially, such that at least a couple of elected officials believe that they need a Hail Mary pass from a trash mountain in order to keep the doors open. That, to me, is the story. Like, what happened? And the step to remedy a situation like that is not to take the money. It's to replace the people and change the system, to completely reorganize. If your family were faced with a personal situation like this, you wouldn't just keep playing the lottery. You wouldn't just keep saying, let's take the bailout. You would say, we got to do something different, or we're going to find ourselves in the same situation and we're going to be beholden to these people even longer. I mean, this to me seems like people wouldn't run their households this way.
Yeah, and you know what? I think part of the, at least personally, one of the things that I keep thinking about is, the justification of increasing taxes. If you take Seneca Meadows out of the equation, it makes sense because of the infrastructure, the incredibly old infrastructure that this town has underneath its streets right now. But I think there again, pointing to the town board as the individuals who should be leading this charge, there hasn't been as much discussion around that fact as there probably should have been.
Right.
Throughout the whole, and I'm going beyond this, looking back before this particular board took over. Obviously, the problems that the town has or are experiencing now, they've been around forever, especially with the landfill. The landfill is not a new issue, but I do think that the false dilemma that you're talking about is an important piece of this to remember and to keep in mind. That said, I don't think it should take away from the discussion, and I'm afraid it might, about just simply easing up on some of the services that are offered in Seneca Falls presently. If infrastructure is priority over services, then there are going to have to be some, checks and, right, give ups on each side. And you can find a balance of where it's fair and works and is good. But there are some larger, more expensive things coming down the pipe for Seneca for Seneca Falls and even Seneca County as a whole that, they have to be dealt with.
Right.
And, I think I look at this more from the infrastructure standpoint and say we shouldn't be using landfill money to do anything that is an essential function. It shouldn't be used to pay the salaries of our employees. It shouldn't be used to, it should literally be used on oddball items effectively. But that's not, it's treated in the budget as, water or sewer or whatever is generating income for a community, or property taxes. And I feel like that isn't really the best way to operate. You know what? Looking forward, I'm not really sure what is in this for Seneca Falls, because I don't think Seneca Falls, the town board right now, has the votes to pass any new host agreement. And I don't think the local law is going anywhere, the one that's currently intact. And, we're in a situation where elections are coming up next year. The residents of this community are going to have a lot of soul searching to do, and they're going to have to see some engagement and activity from folks who have very happily sat on the sidelines and just looked at this issue from afar, despite the fact that it impacts them very directly.
Yeah.
And my hope is that this is one of those things that actually encourages people to get engaged in local politics and to actually run for office and be more involved and go to town board meetings and that sort of thing, because that is really where the rubber meets the road on all of these issues. And it feels and seems like less of a surprise, because I know a lot of people felt like this new host agreement or the memorandum of understanding was a surprise, or they were blindsided by it. But if you were following along, if you were watching this town board, you had to, at least in the back of your mind, think that it was possible.
Well, I mean, and this is what I don't understand. And I guess this goes back to our initial, which I didn't realize it would tie things together so nicely, but that kind of Michael Steele point that you're hiring people to do the job and you need to evaluate if they're doing it well or not. So here's the thing to me. So it's no secret Seneca Falls was having financial difficulty. Now, what have we seen the town supervisor and board do this year to remedy that? They have hired an attorney and an IT director. They didn't have a legal or an internet problem. I mean, they had a financial problem. So why didn't somebody use those funds to bring in a financial manager? Why didn't those funds? I mean, this is the issue you get into when you have what I guess in the city would be called like a strong mayor form of government, but when you don't have an executive, right? Because I'm not saying you abdicate your responsibility to an unelected person, but if you don't have the expertise to fix your community's problems, you bring in the person with the expertise. So what we have seen is not just that the town board and town supervisor didn't have the expertise, they misdiagnosed the problem. They thought what we need to do is fight a lawsuit instead of get our house in order. And I'm telling you, Seneca Meadows has town of Seneca Falls over a barrel if you think that you're going to legally fight your way out of this thing. The issue is until the town of Seneca Falls gets sustainable in its own right so that it can say, we don't need you, you're always going to have the pull of the big money. It's always going to be the guys in their suits and cigars saying, well, we'll help you out. We'll do this. And if you've got a bunch of guys who don't know what they're doing, they're going to say, well, sure, we'll do this because it avoids a lawsuit and it pays the bills. But they are not doing their job, which is to actually get the bills paid in a legitimate way.
Yep.
So I guess you can tell I feel strongly about this because you're right, people shouldn't be surprised that you're getting this negotiated MOU because when they sensed trouble, they hired an attorney. People should have been up in arms, and some people were, but there are not enough people in Seneca Falls paying attention, and they need to say, I'm sorry, we hired the wrong people for the job in terms of the town board. If they can't get a hold of this and clean house and do it the right way. And when I say clean house, I'm not talking about like the employees. I'm saying put your financial business in order. They should not be returning people to that board.
Agreed.
It doesn't make sense.
It gets back to engagement. We keep talking about this. It gets back to people actually being involved in politics and not just talking about politics or not just sitting on the sidelines complaining about their property taxes or otherwise.
And you're up against people who are very skilled at giving you shiny objects to distract your attention. Oh, we might have to cut these positions. Ooh, we might look at this. We might go to court for 30 years. No. Let's just focus on what really matters, the actual business of governing. We're running a deficit budget, and we don't have anybody with the financial management skills to get us out of it. That's the problem to be fixed. You can set the lawsuit stuff and the scare tactics aside. Just get down to business, and you'll get through it.
Yeah, and that puts a bow on this episode. That's for sure. I'm not even going to try to piggyback off of that. You know, you're right. This is an issue that we're going to keep talking about. We're going to keep hearing about.
Unfortunately, I think so.
And it isn't going anywhere. I think it's only going to heat up in the next year as we get closer to elections again in Seneca Falls.